the current freedoms and civil liberties, religious freedom that we have currently in the world is something that the current generation take for granted, because most of us do not know how or why we currently have the freedom that we enjoy. Most of us take for granted that the world will continue as it is, but I'm sorry to say that won't be the case. Now, I would observe with increasing concern, particularly after the inception or the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide, how various governments around the world increasingly are passing laws to restrict the liberties of civilians in their various countries. And because most of us don't appreciate the costs in terms of human lives that have been lost in securing for us the current freedom that we have, we sit down idly without lifting an arm, while these various governments are amassing a lot of authority onto themselves. Why is this concerning? It is concerning because with the increasing autocracy, increasing authority and power being amassed by governments, and dwindling civil and religious and ideological liberties, many of us cannot speak out our minds. We cannot actually practice what we believe in, or say or do what we want to do without infringing on the laws, or without coming into coercion with these powers. As our civil liberties are being restricted and taken away from us, it is time for some of us to speak out so that people will appreciate the need to have a limited government, a government that is for the people, by the people, and of the people, a government that is accountable to the people, a government that doesn't overstep its bounds, a government that has less power, because the power must reside with the people. Now, when the power is being amassed for the people onto the governments, it becomes abusive. And I want to run you down through several historical antecedents so that you appreciate how people have died, people have been brutalized, people's liberties have been abused, taken away from them just because they dare to think otherwise. They dare to, to go against the flow of the status quo. They dare to be independent, to think differently. Now, as this COVID-19 is actually increasing worldwide, you know, it is actually ushering forth what most of us have feared and always spoken against, what we call the New World Order. And in fact, many world leaders, including the German Chancellor Angela Merkel and other world leaders, have come out boldly to say that after the COVID-19 pandemic is over, the world shan't be the same as it was. And that is true because they have already made the laws that will give them a special powers to curtail our freedom without giving us a fair trial. And recently in Texas, one lady was actually put in jail for opening her shop. And she because she failed to apologize to the church, she was fined for $7,000 besides being put in jail for 7 days. So how did our current liberties come about? What actually went into the current world order that we have, and how should we jealously cherish and safeguard the current world order so that it doesn't deteriorate into the past where people didn't have rights? Okay, so the question is, what shall be the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, as almost all governments make laws that give them absolute and unbridled powers with which they can forcefully detain and take away the rights of citizens arbitrarily for the common good, so to speak. I mean, that's what they say, for the common good. Now, a new world order, of course, shall emerge after this pandemic, in which the freedoms of citizens shall be curtailed substantially. But what will this new world order mean for religious, civil, and ideological liberty? And why should all right thinking people be concerned and worried about this? Indeed, this new world order shall involve laws that shall presume to give peace and security by taking away our religious, civil, and ideological liberty. Now, if you know that religious intolerance and ideological differences has led to more wars than peace, more bloodshed than lives saved, you'll be alarmed. Good morning. Welcome to this discussion on ideological intolerance and religious wars. The relationship between world peace, wars, and religion and ideology is quite subtle and hidden from the view of many people, but it is well known to students of history. Now, it is because of the role of religion in several wars and bloodshed that many people don't have anything to do with religion. Now, unbeknown to many of us, it was the founding of America and their successful governance system, which was novel up till then. This system of republicanism, that is a state without a king and a church without a pope, the separation of church and state, and freedom of religion, that has brought the relative peace and religious tolerance that the world enjoys today. And I'll give certain historical antecedents to buttress these points. Now, indeed, the future portends another religious war, if only you are a student of Bible prophecy. The Bible predicts the establishment of an antichrist system that shall seek to force people to worship the antichrist against their will, against their conscience and their duress, and threat of being unable to sell, buy, and even unable to live. So religious intolerance is hinged on the belief, on the ideology that one's faith or religion is far superior to that of another, such that the person in authority seeks to coerce those under him or her to abandon their religion for that of the authority. Now, this forced worship or non-worship of God leads to disagreement, bloodshed, and outright war. So it is not only tribalism or ethnocentrism, particularly in Africa, which leads to war, but religious differences also has caused so much war and bloodshed in the world. Because religion also defines culture, it defines people. But unfortunately, we are already seeing signs of a movement which is forming to spearhead what we call a new world order, under which we will have a one world government, a one world ruler, and a one world religion. You see, post World War II, let me go back a little. Post World War I, we formed what we call the League of Nations to try to bring the nations together under one umbrella. It was unsuccessful. Post World War II, we now form the United Nations, under which we have all world governments. So already you can see the European Union forming to bring together all countries in Europe. You can see the AU trying to bring together all countries in Africa. So there are already movements trying to bring together all nations of the world under a one world government. And this one world government will be ruled by a one world ruler. And the whole world will be forced to have one world religion. Meaning that under the new world order, there will be no way or there will be no tolerance for dissent. So in this new world order, where one world ruler, one world religion, everything, they'll have everyone will be compelled on the pain of death, hunger, and economic hardship to accept the rules and regulations of this new power. And obviously, this new power will have laws and regulations which will go contrary to the teachings of God. And this is what the Bible predicts as Antichrist system in Revelation 13. There shall cause both rich and poor and young and old and whatever, everybody to worship or to take the mark of the beast. And those who fail to take this mark shall be compelled on the pain of death. And in fact, you shall even be prevented from buying or selling. So the world is gradually moving towards that. But before the question is, what can we do to prepare for that? But before we get there, let's look at historical antecedents. So you might ask, how has these ideological and religious differences led to war and bloodshed, and how can this happen in the future? As I'm referring to the Bible. Now, before that, let me set a principle straight. The law that God has given to man, if you know the Bible very well, we have what we call the Ten Commandments. Now, the Ten Commandments is divided into two. The first four defines our relationship to God, and the last six defines our relationship between ourselves as humans. Okay, so the first four of the Ten Commandments, which defines the relationship of between man and God, is so sacred, is so sacrosanct that no other human being can come between any individual and his maker. No other human being can make laws restricting or respecting or referring or addressing how any other person should think, should worship God, or should behave. All right. But the last six refers to our relationship, the relationship between ourselves as humans. And that one, yes, we can make laws. That one, governments are actually there to make laws to regulate human behavior with regards to human association or human to human relationship. For instance, we can make laws regarding thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery, like thou shalt not be insubordinate to your parents, thou shalt not kill. All these are part of the Ten Commandments that actually refers to human relationship, and that one government can make laws, but no government or authority has the right to enforce the worship or non-worship of God, because that is sacrosanct. That is the first four commandments, and nobody has the right to do that. All right. Now, it may surprise you to know that even in the Bible, people were killed for thinking or daring to think differently from the status quo. Now, the first murder in the Bible, where Cain killed Abel, was because Abel thought differently from Cain. Abel acted differently by being obedient to God, and Cain was rebellious. So Cain tried to talk Abel into joining him in rebellion against God, and Abel refused. And because Abel dared to think differently, Abel dared to have an ideological difference from that of Cain. Cain became angry and Cain killed him. So the first murder on this earth was because of religious intolerance or ideological intolerance. Fast forward to the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar made a large golden statue and forces the whole world under his rule to worship that statue. Three young guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, said, "No, we will not do it because it is against our conscience. It is contrary to our religion, to our belief." And Nebuchadnezzar threatens them that I'm going to kill you. I'm going to throw you into the fire if you fail to do that. And that was religious persecution. That was when a king tried to make a law which contradicts that of God's law. A law that forces the conscience, that forces another human being as to how he or she must worship God. Remember that Daniel was thrown into a lion's den for praying to God by Darius, and he was saved. Now, the Pharaoh of Egypt in Moses' day refused to allow the Israelites to go and worship God because he wanted to keep them under his rule as slaves. He wasn't willing to tolerate that the Israelites must have the freedom to worship God as and how they wanted. And God had to intervene to destroy Egypt before he allowed them to go. Even after he allowed them to go, he chased them again to bring them back under Egyptian rule. You see. Now, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, was killed by the Jewish authorities. Why? Because he dared to think differently. Jesus was different. He practiced a different set of, like, according to them, religion. They felt like he was breaking the traditions and the rules of the rulers and authorities, and so the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, the rulers, the Levites, they came together and they killed him. So you see how religious intolerance even led to the death of Christ. Now, not only him, Stephen, the first Christian martyr, was killed in AD 34 because he was a Christian. James was beheaded by Herod because he was a Christian, because he had a different belief. He didn't commit any crime. He didn't do anything, but because of his belief, he was killed. Peter was put into prison. Paul was beaten to pulp in Lystra, in Derbe, in Lycaonia. Even when he went to Asia Minor, certain countries like in Thessalonica, modern day Thessaloniki in Greece, when he went to Berea, in Philippi, he was beaten and thrown to prison, to jail. Why? Because he was preaching Christ. All right. Now, fast forward to Nero's time. Almost all the apostles were killed by Nero, and Nero actually burnt Rome and forcefully, or rather say, libellously blamed the Christians for burning Rome, and he killed many of the Christians. Well, Nero killed Paul. Nero killed Peter. Now, after Nero came another emperor called Diocletian. Diocletian killed millions of Christians within a period of 10 good years. Within 10 good years, Diocletian killed several Christians in the second century. Now, after the Roman Empire collapsed, the power was shifted to the church through the mediation of Constantine, and the Bishop of Rome became the head or the leader or the power in Western Europe. So the papacy or the Vatican became the sole authority in the western part of the Roman Empire. Now, under the rule of the Catholic bishop or the Catholic popes, people who had different views, who were called heretics. Heretics are people who practice or teach differently from that of the Catholic Church, were hunted down like animals, killed, and thrown into dungeons. Some of them were burnt at the stake. And you can read on the history of the Valdensians, who were killed for thousands of years by the Catholic Church because they had a Bible. At that time, you couldn't even have the Bible. People were killed in Holland, modern day Netherlands, for having the Bible. People were burned at the stake. Now, it is estimated that more than 10 million people were killed by the Holy Roman Empire under the rule of the Catholic papacy, the modern day Vatican Church, during her more than 1,260 years rule in Europe between 538 AD and 1798 AD. More than 10 million Christians who dare to think differently or who dare to practice their faith contrary to that of the teachings of the Catholic Church were killed. And recently, Pope John Paul II actually came to apologize for that. That is why we have white people in South Africa and North America, because they fled from religious persecution in the Catholic Europe and later from the Anglican Britain, because also the Puritans had to leave Britain because they also being persecuted by the Anglican Church in Britain. Now, all these people fled from religious persecution to found America on the principles of liberty of conscience, liberty of religion, liberty to do whatever you want to do as long as you don't trample on another person's rights. Hence, the Bill of Rights, which was passed by the American Congress, that Congress shall not make any law respecting the establishment of any religion or the exercise thereof. Now, during the 16th century, after the Protestant Reformation, there was a 30 years war between Southern Europe and Northern Europe. And you know why? The Southern Europeans were Catholics, and they were alarmed at the increasing spread of Protestantism in Europe. So they came together to reclaim the lost lands or the lost nations back to the Roman Church. So under the encouragement of the church, these Catholic nations came together and they declared war on nations that had left the authority of the Pope and become Protestant. So the Northern Europeans, the Scandinavians, the Northern Germany, Saxony, Netherlands, Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, England. These nations were in war for 30 good years. Why? Because of religion. Because one part of the divide believes that you were part of us initially and you are now leaving, so come back to us. And the other party says, no, we won't come back. We now believe that the Pope has no authority in religious affairs, so we must be free. You can read on this history, the 30 Years' War in Europe, and you see what I'm trying to say. And millions perished because of this belief or this intolerance for religious ideology. Now, before or even during these periods, and even prior to that, we have what are called the Crusades. Now, during the medieval ages, the popes wanted to own Jerusalem. Now remember, during this time, the popes were the head of Europe. Like the pope was the ruler of Europe, so they wanted to own Jerusalem. And unfortunately for them, the Muslims had conquered the Middle East and were now having Jerusalem. So the popes actually encouraged the Christian nations in Europe to send armies to go and defeat the Muslims in Jerusalem and claim Jerusalem for the Pope. So the Crusades were born, and millions of people perished on both sides, both Christians and Muslims, because of these Crusades. Why? Because somebody wants Jerusalem, because of religion. Now, Islam expanded from Medina to Mecca, through the Middle East, to Northern Africa, Southern Europe, and deep into Eastern Asia, particularly in India, Pakistan, China, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, up to Indonesia, Malaysia, through war of conquest. And they killed millions of people. I mean, Islam was spread through war, holy war, hijab, holy war. And millions were slaughtered. I mean, if you're a woman, you're lucky they'll save you, and then they'll marry you, and then you give birth. And in fact, you were only spared if you were willing to convert to Islam. All right. So religious persecution and religious wars. In fact, most of the wars in the world have been fought because of religion. And by the time we are through this discussion, you will understand what I'm trying to say. Now, the famous Spanish Armada, which consisted of a fleet of 130 ships, was actually sent by Spain to attack and conquer England. Why? Because Queen Elizabeth, who was then ruling England, was a Protestant. And before the ascendancy, her ascendancy to the throne, Queen Mary, who was her predecessor, was a Catholic. Now, Queen Mary had killed many Protestants, particularly at Oxford, martyred the Archbishop of Canterbury, Nicholas Ridley, Charles Cranmer, Hugh Latimer. He burnt several Protestants at the stake. So after her demise and the ascendancy to the throne of Queen Elizabeth, the Catholic nations in Europe were alarmed, like they were angry that why should England now revert back to Protestant rule. So one of the reasons why the Spanish Armada was sent to defeat England was because England was Protestant. Can you imagine? So religious wars, and in fact, most wars have been fought because of religion and ideological differences. In France, the Protestants in France were called the Huguenots. Now, these Huguenots were chased from France by the Catholic monarchy of France. They were hunted like animals, and most of them fled to South Africa. So many South Africans many South African white people actually are French. That's why you have French names in South Africa, like the Kuzis. All these are French names because they trace their ancestry back to France. They were Huguenots who were chased from France because they were Protestants. Some too fled to Switzerland. That is why in modern day Switzerland you have part being French, part being German. So thousands of Protestants Huguenots were killed at midnight on a day called the Saint Bartholomew Massacre. All right, there was a possession of Catholic priests and the king. They marched through the streets, dragged Protestants from their rooms, and they killed them. More than 50,000 Protestants died on that night, and the church celebrated. And when I say the church, I mean the Catholic Church celebrated. Why? Because they believed they were killing these Protestants for God. They believed they were doing it for like in the name of religion, because they believed these Protestants were heretics. Their form of religion was contrary to God's order. So in their view, they were doing it for God. Now, World War One has a religious undertone, and many of you are not aware, and I'll tell you. Now, before World War One, the Russo-Turkish War had led to the defeat of Turkey, and certain nations in the Balkans. When we say the Balkans, it refers to the South Central Europe, which belonged to Turkey, were now taken from Turkey. Turkey was under the rulership of the Ottoman Empire at that time. Was taken from the Ottoman Empire and given to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. during the Berlin Accord. Now, Austro-Hungary was a bigger empire composed of modern-day Austria, Hungary, then Yugoslavia, or modern-day Croatia, and or the Balkans. So, Austro-Hungary was under the rule of Catholic monarchy. In fact, modern-day Austria and Hungary are basically Catholics. So these were Catholics, and when the after the Russo-Turkish War, when these Balkan states were basically Muslims. Remember that the Ottoman Empire was a Muslim empire. So Bosnia was Muslim, and then the Serbs and the Slavs were Eastern Orthodox Christians. Now these Eastern Orthodox Christians are not Roman Catholics. They broke away from the Catholic. There was a division between the Orthodox Christians and the Western Roman Catholics during the partitioning of Rome into Constantinople and Rome. When Constantine moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople, those guys at Constantinople or modern day Turkey, the eastern part of the Roman Empire, felt like they also have authority and they will not go under the authority of the Western Roman Pope or the papacy, so to speak. So there has been a division for many years, between the Orthodox Christians and the Catholic Church in Western Europe. So these Serbs and Slavs were Orthodox Christians. So during the Berlin Agreement or the Berlin Accord, these people, the Bosnians who were Islam, the Slavs and the Serbs who were Orthodox Christians, were placed under the Catholic authority of Austro-Hungary. They were not happy because during this time they were being suppressed, they were being forced to convert into Catholicism, they were being persecuted or prejudiced. I mean, if you're not a Catholic, you're not given higher office within the government. So there were nationalist Serbs, nationalist Bosnians who were fighting for freedom. Even before they were placed under Austro-Hungary, these nationalists were there, these terrorists were there who wanted their freedom. So when they were placed under Austro-Hungary, they became more incensed. All right. So they formed a rebel movement, and one of them managed to shoot to death the heir apparent to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, called Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now he was shot on June 28, 1914, by a guy called he was a Serbian nationalist called Gavrilo Princip. And he wasn't the only person who was shot. He was shot with his wife called Sophie. Now, when he was shot, it kind of angered the Austro-Hungarian Empire that why should these Serbs and Bosnians kill our heir apparent? So it led immediately to World War One. So under the backing of Germany, Austro-Hungary declared war on Serbia, but Serbia too was under the protection of Russia. You can remember that the Russians had defeated Turkey, and then taking these Balkan states from Turkish rule. Okay, so they were under the protection of Russia. So immediately, the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Serbia or on the Serbs. The Serbs went for protection from Russia. Russia too declared war on Austro-Hungary. Then Germany declared war on Russia, and then France and Britain too were also allies of Russia. So they also declared war on Germany. Then World War One began. So World War One was actually triggered by a religious undertone because the Serbians who were Orthodox Christians and then the Bosnians who were Muslim wanted their freedom. All right. Now, if you have been following world history, particularly in the early 90s, you might have heard about Slobodan Milosevic, about Kosovo War, about Montenegro, about Bosnia-Herzegovina, about Serbia. These wars actually have continued from World War One to World War Two until recently. So until recently, we had what we call the Republic of Yugoslavia. So after the World War One, let me recap. After World War One, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, of course, they lost. So Croatia became a separate nation. The Croatians were actually Catholics. Okay, so they became a separate nation. Austria and Hungary broke up into Austria, modern Austria, and then Hungary. Then you have what we call Yugoslavia. Now, Yugoslavia was consisting of Kosovo, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Macedonia, Montenegro. Now, these were also more like an amalgamation of tribes and various ethnicities who had their own religion. Okay, partly Muslim, partly Orthodox Christian, and minority Catholics. So it still couldn't hold. So Yugoslavia also broke up after 1994, during the bombing of Serbia, Sarajevo, if you know these countries. Slobodan Milosevic, being tried for war crimes and all that. So they broke up, and now you have Kosovo, you have Bosnia Herzegovina, you have Macedonia, you have Montenegro, and all these had religious undertones. Now, World War II was also actually fought with some religious undertone. Why? Because Hitler, after losing World War One, was bitter in Austria against the Jews because he felt the Jews were taking over their jobs, and he hated the Jews. So Hitler actually came to power with a sole aim of exterminating all Jews in Europe. All right, and he managed to kill 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Now, many people don't know that Hitler's rise to power was mainly fueled by the Vatican. Now, remember that the Vatican had lost its authority in Europe. The Catholic Church was losing or had lost almost everything in Europe. Now, the then Catholic Pope, or the Catholic, the Vatican, or the Holy See Pope, called Eugene Pacelli, under Pope Pius, I think the 12th, was thinking of how he can use the war to consolidate his power on Europe. So he thought of linking up with Hitler to actually get his powers back, so that if Hitler wins the war, he also gets his share of the booty. So Pope Pius II actually helped Hitler to power. How? By disbanding the opposition Catholic Center-Right Party. Now, the Catholic Center-Right Party was so strong and opposing to Hitler's rise that Hitler couldn't have come to power without their disbandment. So the Pope actually helped to disband this party so that there will be no opposition party in Germany. And he helped, or he influenced them to also sign the final edict that made Hitler an autocratic ruler. Now, when you read a book by Hitler called Mein Kampf, Hitler states that his Gestapo, or his secret police, was actually fashioned after the order of the after the order of the Jesuit Society, which is an order of the Catholic Church, and that he was actually helped by the Catholic Pope. In fact, it is a well-known fact that Pope John Paul II, who was then in Poland, helped Hitler to kill many Jews, which he later came to apologize. When you read a book by one John Cornwell called Hitler's Pope, he details how he went through many of these files in the Vatican library, and he saw how Pope Pius the 12th actually helped Hitler to power. Now, one guy called Avram Manhattan has also written a lot on how the Catholic Church played a substantial role in World War II. And I mean, these are historical facts, and you cannot run away from it. And even Pope John Paul II, when he was, there were attempts to canonize him into a saint. A lot of people rose up in an uproar against it. That how can you make this guy who killed a lot of Jews a saint? So the religious undertone in World War II and the role of the Catholic Church in the death of millions of Jews and millions of people because of his desire to come back to power in Europe cannot be in doubt, if only you know your historical facts well. All right, so it is worth noting that, in fact, it is not only World War II. If you know very well about the incidents surrounding the Vietnam War of the 1950s, you can read more of that in Vietnam, Why Did You Go, by Avram Manhattan. Southern Vietnam was basically Catholic, and Northern Vietnam was under communist rule. Now, the then Catholic president in Southern Vietnam, he was called Ngo Dinh Mien. This guy was oppressing the Buddhists in Southern Vietnam and giving preference to only Catholics in his government and also in the country. So the Buddhists in Southern Vietnam became alarmed as to why he was forcing the Buddhists to convert to Catholicism by force and even killing them for failing to do that. So the Buddhists became like alarmed and annoyed and fed up. So they began to burn themselves in the streets, going on hunger strikes, demonstrations. All right. And this triggered a nationwide, do I say, uh, rebellion or anarchy or whatever. And it led to many of the Buddhists joining the ranks of the communists. It strengthened the ranks of the communists, and they were able to win the war against Southern Vietnam. Of course, the Americans went there to Vietnam with all their power, but they couldn't win because people were fed up with the autocratic rule of the Catholic leadership. I mean, this is common history. You can read about it, and you know how millions of people, in fact, more than 50,000 Americans lost their lives because of the Vietnam War, and millions of Vietnamese people died because they were Buddhists. They were killed because for being Buddhist. They were persecuted for being Buddhist instead of being Catholic. All right, but in the end, the Catholics lost the war. How? John F. Kennedy, who was then the president of the United States, he was a Catholic, but he became fed up with the atrocities of his own Catholic colleague in South Vietnam. So he pulled his soldiers, and the final war was in Saigon. I'm sure you've heard about Saigon. I mean, there's a movie on that. He pulled the soldiers from Saigon. So for pulling the soldiers from Saigon, it enabled the communists to overrun southern Vietnam and kill Ngo Dinh Diem. Ngo Dinh Diem, sorry. Now, John F. Kennedy was hated by the church for betraying them and joining the American troops for supporting a Catholic president and allowing him to be killed. Now, because of this, John F. Kennedy too was killed in Dallas, in America. Okay, in fact, he lost his life because of this war, all because of the church desire to force Buddhists to cater to their interests. So JFK's assassination is directly linked to the Vietnam War, which began as a result of religious persecution of Buddhists. And he's not the only president whose death is linked to the Catholic Church. Abraham Lincoln, who helped to actually bring an end to the Civil War in America, was killed by Catholics. John Wilkes Booth and his sister Mary Surratt and his relative John Surratt, these were Catholics. In fact, John Surratt was trained to be a Catholic priest, but he dropped out. These were Irish people. Now, when you go to America, the state of Maryland, where you have Washington, D.C., was actually a Catholic colony. The name Maryland is named after Mary. You know how like Mary is venerated within the Catholic domains. So Maryland is named after Mary. Now, John Wilkes Booth and then Mary Surratt and John Surratt, they were all living in Maryland. And Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, is also within Maryland. All right. So when Abraham Lincoln helped to bring an end to the Civil War, in which he used a lot of Irish Catholics, most of these Irish are Catholics, to fight the war, he was being hated. Okay, so he was killed for ending the war. And when John Wilkes Booth and Mary Surratt were found guilty and hanged for killing him, John Surratt, who was part of the plot to actually abduct and kill Abraham Lincoln, managed to escape through Montreal. Now, Montreal in Canada was under Catholic authority at that point, and they facilitated his departure through Montreal to Rome. All right. Now, if you read the history, you know, so I don't want to waste much time on that. So, there's a lot of evidence to show that religious ideology, differences in religious thinking has led to so much bloodshed and war in history. So, these historical antecedents is not only related to it's not only limited to the Catholic Church, but also especially in Islam. And that is where I'll draw most of my current facts from. Now, in Islamic countries, the chief imam or the chief cleric, and in fact, these people hold the highest or the greater, if not the absolute control over civil power alongside the monarchs or the authoritarian leaders, because most Islamic countries are governed by other monarchs or autocrats. Now, these religious leaders ensure that the Sharia law is supreme law of the state and that the nation is purely run on Sharia law. Now, because of that, Islamic countries do not countenance dissenters. And anybody who goes against the Islamic principle or the Islamic law within Islamic states are punished by the Sharia law. Just as heretics were punished by the Catholic Church under the Holy Roman Empire, and even the scientist Galileo Galilei was forced to renounce that the earth is round and that the earth goes around the sun just because the church believed otherwise at other point. It is the same in Islamic countries. You cannot think differently from what the Quran preaches in Islamic countries. To date, evangelism is banned in Islamic countries, and anybody who evangelizes in Islamic countries is caught and killed, particularly in Pakistan. Many Christians have lost their lives, even in Turkey. So if you're a Christian and you go and preach in Islamic countries, like in Egypt and all that, they'll kill you because it is banned. Meanwhile, in Islamic, in Christian countries, Muslims are free to practice their religion. Now, the teachings of the Quran on jihad or holy war has been a major reason for the formation of terrorist organizations in Islamic states or regions. Now, these teachings of the Quran also explains why democracy can hardly thrive in Islamic states. Now, I want to take a moment to actually think or just go through all the Islamic countries and ask ourselves how many of them are actually democratic. And do you know, like, the that is why democratic Islamic states such as Afghanistan and Iraq are unstable. Now look at Egypt. Egypt became democratic recently, and the first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi, was deposed in a coup d'etat by General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. So Egypt reverted back to military rule. Why? Because the tenets of Islam is autocratic. Like Islam wants you to obey or die. So you cannot be in an Islamic country and have democracy where people are able to do what they want, have freedom. So if you are taking your religious freedom, your ideological freedom, and your freedom to do whatever you want to do for granted, look at Islamic countries, where even people who practice LGBTQ are killed. They are killed. So Islam doesn't countenance divergence views. You can't have your own view or your own whatever in Islamic countries. No, it's not allowed. Women are not allowed to drive until recently in Saudi Arabia. You cannot do what you want to do. You are forced to do what the state wants, because in Islamic countries, the state is the church and the church is the state. So you cannot have your own religion. All right. Recently, there was one journalist called Jamal Khashoggi, who was working with the Washington Post, was killed in an embassy in Turkey by Saudi Arabian consul officials because he was very critical of the Saudi Arabian government. Now, a perfect example of modern day paradigm of religious intolerance or religious wars is Islam. And Islamic states of the Middle East, North Africa, and East Africa, like you can see that in all these places, you cannot have your way. You have to counsel to whatever they want. They want. If not, you're going to be put in jail or you're going to die. So the perennial Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Iran, Israeli-Lebanon hostilities or wars are basically due to Islamic-Jewish religious differences between these two states. The Jews see Jerusalem as theirs, whilst the Muslims too claim it. And this has led to countless bloodshed, and it could even trigger a World War III. All right. Now, it is worth noting that during the apartheid era, all right, like it's not only the Catholic Church in Christendom, it is worth noting, and it's a well-known fact, that the racially segregatory laws of apartheid in South Africa was not only supported but in fact, it was birthed, refined, and promulgated by the Dutch Reformed Church. The Dutch Reformed Church actually pushed politicians to accept these dogmas and practice it until the races were physically separated. So apartheid flourished in South Africa mainly because of the Dutch Reformed Church, which preached these practices to politicians and even pushed them to do that. And you can get more evidence on this online. One reference will suffice. You can read an article by Susan Rennie Rittner called The Dutch Reformed Church and Apartheid, published in the Journal of Contemporary History, and it was published on October 1st, 1967. It is there for you to read. All right, so religious intolerance has existed, and look at the number of people who died during apartheid. Look at the bloodshed. Look at the persecution that occurred during apartheid, because a church believed that it had authority to separate the races, even to ban interracial marriages. So please, we shouldn't take our current religious freedom and our current freedom to speak what we want, to say what we want, for granted. All right. Now, if you go to Yemen currently, there's a prolonged war in Yemen. Why? Because there are two main tribes in Yemen. Sorry, not tribe, but ideologies in terms of Islam in Yemen. We have what they call the Shiite Muslims and the Sunni Muslims. The Sunni Muslims are the majority of Muslims. More than 90% of Muslims in the world are Sunni. The Shiites are in a minority. Now, in Yemen, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia are backing the Sunni Muslims to gain power in Yemen, whilst Iran and Bahrain are backing the Shiite Muslims in Yemen to also gain control of Yemen. And because of these religious differences, look at the number of people who are dying, who are being killed, who are starving to death, just because one guy is Sunni, or one party is Sunni and one party is Shiite. All right. Now, this inherent desire to have an Islamic state ruled by Islamic law is a cause for insurrection and rebellion in all countries with substantial Muslim population, where the government is not Islamic or is too moderate. And I'll give some examples. The recent ISIS Caliphate, which was formed in eastern Syria and western Iraq, was formed because they felt like they needed an Islamic state where they can enforce Sharia law strictly, because they felt like the Islamic countries were becoming too moderate. And look at the number of people who were killed. Look at the ethnic cleansing that went on. The number of Kurds who were killed by these ISIS people, just because they were not Arabs, just because they were not ideologically aligned to the ISIS teachings. The number of LGBTQ people who were thrown down the wall, who were killed, the number of, so people have actually suffered under ISIS just because they didn't agree to their ideology. Look at the formation of Al-Shabaab, terrorist group in Somalia. Look at the number of people they have killed just because Al-Shabaab want to have an Islamic state in Somalia. Boko Haram in northern Nigeria has killed more than 10,000 people to date, killing and abducting students for taking part in normal education because they say that Western education is a crime. And they're trying to create an Islamic caliphate in the northern Borno state and the northern Nigeria, and they're trying to also join up to Chad, but they are facing problems in Chad. Recently, there have been offshoots of Al-Qaeda and ISIS in northern Mali, Burkina Faso, and the Sahel region of Western Africa. And these cells are also terrorizing people, raiding churches, killing Christians, abducting and raping women. Now, these groups attack and kill Christians and moderate Muslims with the aim to form an Islamic nation under Islamic Sharia law. And they believe that what they are doing is under jihad. So religious intolerance isn't only found among religious bodies or states, but also among atheistic states, particularly those who practice communism or socialism. And in socialist or communist states, Christians, Muslims, and other religions are banned. Particularly in China, Christians, Muslims are facing persecution. All right. And recently, there have been reports of Chinese Uyghurs. These Uyghurs are Muslims in northeastern China. There are reports that they have been targeted and abducted and forcefully sent into concentration camps, similar to what happened in World War II. And they are being forcefully re-educated with communist propaganda so that they will stop practicing Islam and adopt communism. And the Chinese government is actually defending this under the excuse of re-education. Christians are not allowed to practice freely in China. Also in Russia, Christians were being persecuted in Russia. So communism also doesn't allow faith-based religions to practice because they see them as a threat to their consolidation of power. So in conclusion, the greatest threat to human existence and the causes of war and bloodshed since time immemorial have been religious intolerance or religious suppression or ideological intolerance. But even more dangerous is the amalgamation of church and state, in which the state adopts a particular religious belief and forces all persons under its rule to practice that religion. This and this is being seen in Islamic states where Islamic clerics issue fatwas for war or enforce Sharia law. It's being seen in communist states where all religions or faiths are banned. In apartheid South Africa, it was seen where the state was controlled by the Dutch Reformed Church. In Catholic Europe and Catholic South Vietnam, it was seen where non-Catholic adherents were oppressed and hunted down and killed. Now, all these things eventually lead to war, bloodshed, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and abuse of human rights. Now, the Bible predicts a recap of all these atrocities in the future, where the whole world shall be forced to worship the Antichrist system under pain of threat of economic sanctions and death. Now, it is clear that the Third World War will be started by religious intolerance. Mark my words. Third World War will definitely be started by religious intolerance or ideological difference, particularly in the Middle East, where the Jews and the Muslims are at each other's throats. And the world will end with religious persecution of opposing beliefs under the Antichrist, as the Bible said. Now, the take-home message is that no one can force or decide for another what, whom, or when to worship. And as stated by the framers of the U.S. Constitution, everyone must worship God according to the dictates of his or her conscience, and that Congress shall not make any law respecting the establishment of religion or the exercise thereof. So it behoves on us to jealously guard the religious freedom, the ideological freedom, the freedom of the press that we have currently in the world, so that it is not taken from us by these politicians. Because if we sit down idly and they take it from us, trust me, you and I are going to pay for it. You cannot speak your mind. You cannot do what you want. You cannot even put certain things on Facebook or whatever. You're going to be censored. So even God, who made us, does not force us. So why should we aspire to force our fellow men? Food for thought.